3 years? 1,095 days. No birthday call when I turned 62. No text when my dog of 14 years finally gave out and I had to carry him to the vet in a towel because he couldn't walk anymore. Not a single word when the company I spent 31 years building from a two-man operation into a structural engineering firm with 43 employees got acquired and I finally retired and didn't know what to do with myself for the first 3 weeks. 3 years of that. And I had made my peace with it the way you make peace with a bad knee, not by forgetting it's there, but by learning which movements to avoid. Then my phone lit up on a Tuesday night in October, sitting on my kitchen counter while I was cleaning up after dinner. Just me and a plate of leftover chicken I'd been meaning to reheat for 2 days. Quiet house. The kind of quiet that used to bother me and now just felt like furniture. I almost didn't pick it up. But you don't forget your daughter's number, even after 3 years, even when she's the one who stopped calling. My chest did something complicated when I saw her name on the screen. Not quite hope, something older and worse than hope, like the reflex that makes you flinch toward a hot stove instead of away from it. I set down the dish towel, picked up the phone. Her message was short, 12 sentences, I counted. Dad, I know it's been a while. Colton and I are getting married in the spring. We'd like to have a family dinner before things get too busy with the planning. There's a steakhouse downtown I think you'd like. Saturday the 19th at 7. I'm also going to be up front with you. Colton has a real estate investment opportunity he'd like to present to you. He's raised most of what he needs, but there's a gap. He's asking for $200,000 from family investors. I know that's a big number. We think it's a reasonable request given your situation. I hope you'll come. Lacey. I read it twice. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, which is something I almost never do anymore, because eating alone at a table feels more like an event than a meal. There it was. Not I miss you, Dad. Not I've been thinking about you. Just a dinner invitation and a dollar amount and the words given your situation, which is a polite way of saying we looked at what you're worth. Welcome to Dad's harsh revenge. Stay with me. This one goes somewhere you won't see coming. Hit that like button if you've ever been in a situation where love had a price tag attached to it. I won't pretend I handled that text gracefully. I sat there for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, somebody's car alarm went off for about 45 seconds and then quit. I reread those 12 sentences probably 6 times, and each time I kept snagging on the same phrase. I hope you'll come. That small, ordinary sentence? She hoped I'd come. Not please come or I want to see you. Just hope, leaning there at the end of the message like it was barely holding its own weight. I should tell you why those 3 years happened. Because nothing about this story makes sense without it. Lacey's mother and I separated when Lacey was 19 and already in college. By the time the divorce was finalized, Lacey was 22 and had chosen sides the way young people do when they're still figuring out how the world works, and the easiest explanation is also the cruelest one. That one parent is good and one parent is not. Her mother, Nadine, is not a bad person. I want to be careful about that. But Nadine had a way of framing things that took years to show itself clearly. The word she used most often when talking about me, I eventually learned from Lacey herself, was withholding. As in, your father is withholding when it comes to his feelings, withholding when it comes to his time, withholding when it comes to money. 6 years of that word repeated like a drumbeat, and eventually Lacey heard it as the whole song. I was not a perfect father. I worked too much. I missed 2 of Lacey's high school swim meets because of job deadlines. I was better at analyzing load tolerances than I was at saying I love you out loud without it sounding like I was reading from a script. I know all of that. I've sat with all of that for a long time. But withholding? No. I paid for college. All 4 years, no loans. I bought her first car and paid the insurance for 3 years after. When she was 25 and her apartment flooded, and she lost almost everything, I drove 4 hours in a December ice storm to help her move, and when she couldn't make rent for 2 months, I covered it without one word of complaint. And then Colton came along. I met him once, briefly, before the estrangement. He sold real estate investment packages to private investors, had a firm downtown with glass walls, and a receptionist, and a coffee machine that probably cost more than my first truck. He wore his suits the way certain men wear suits, like the suit itself was making an argument on his behalf. He shook my hand at Lacey's birthday dinner and spent the next 20 minutes explaining to me, a structural engineer with 3 decades of experience, what load-bearing capacity meant. I remember sitting there thinking, this man has never been wrong in his life, at least not in his own mind. That same dinner, he and Lacey asked me for $80,000. A seed investment in his firm, they called it. He had a prospectus, a laminated prospectus. I asked some questions about his financials. He answered in a way that didn't actually answer anything. I said I needed to think about it. Lacey didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after that. When she finally did, she told me that Colton had felt judged by my questions and that I had embarrassed her in front of her partner. 3 months later, the silence settled in for what would become 3 years. That was the version of events I turned over in my mind while I sat at that kitchen table on a Tuesday in October. I gave myself a full day before I replied to her text. Then I said I'd come to dinner. But before I committed to showing up, I went and looked into Colton, not to trap him, not because I was angry. Because I'm an engineer by nature and by 4 decades of habit, and when a structure doesn't look right to me, when the numbers don't add up the way they should, I don't walk underneath it until I understand why. My crews used to joke that I could find a flaw in a load calculation from across a job site. Turns out, people aren't all that different from buildings when you know what you're looking for. I found the first crack by Thursday morning. His firm's website was impressive. Good photography, lots of smiling people in conference rooms, a long list of development projects with addresses that sounded prestigious. But when I started pulling the actual addresses, cross-referencing them against county property records and public databases, some of those projects didn't exist in any form that showed up in public filings. Buildings listed as completed were still vacant lots on Google Street View. Permits that should have been on record with the city weren't there. I kept going. A former business partner had filed a civil lawsuit against him in 2022, settled quietly with a non-disclosure agreement. 2 investor complaints filed with FINRA, both dismissed but still sitting in the public record if you knew where to look. A lien on a property in his name attached to a defaulted promissory note. By Friday evening, I had found something worse. A notice from the SEC's Division of Enforcement, dated 3 months prior, announcing the opening of a formal investigation into a private real estate investment fund. The name of the fund matched a fund listed prominently on Colton's firm's website. I printed everything. 31 pages. I put them in a plain manila folder and set it on the kitchen counter. Then I got up Saturday morning, made a pot of coffee, and sat on the back porch and watched the leaves come down for a while, a full hour out there. Cardinals were working at the feeder. The neighbor's dog barked at something beyond the fence and then gave up on it. It was a good, ordinary morning. I want you to know that because what came next was not. I drove downtown in my truck. The restaurant Lacey had chosen was called The Reserve. Newer place, all dark wood and dim lighting, the kind of room where they refill your water before you finish it, and everything on the menu is described with the word artisanal. I'd been there once before for a colleague's retirement dinner. Good steak. Tonight it felt like a different room entirely. I saw them through the window before I went inside. Lacey was on her phone, scrolling with that automatic motion that says she'd been there long enough to get bored. Colton sat across from her looking like he was already bored of waiting. He had on a blazer over a black shirt, no tie, the kind of deliberately casual expensive that says I can afford not to try. I took a breath, grabbed the folder from the passenger seat, and went in. Lacey looked up when I reached the table. 3 years, and her face hit me in a way I wasn't fully prepared for. She looked older, not in a bad way, just real, the way people look when life has been happening to them, whether they invited it to or not. Dad, she said, not hi, not I'm glad you came, just my name, like a confirmation that I had in fact shown up. Hey, sweetheart. Colton stood and extended a hand. His grip was the handshake of a man who has practiced handshakes. Neil, he said, good to finally meet you properly. Lacey talks about you. I didn't ask what she said. We sat down. The first 15 minutes were what I can only describe as performance. Weather, the drive over, how long the wait list was to get a reservation here. Colton ordered a $160 bottle of wine without consulting the table, and then poured it like he was doing us a favor. So, he said at some point, settling back in his chair with the ease of a man who has never once felt like the weakest person in the room, Lacey tells me you were in structural engineering. I said, ran my own firm for 31 years. Great field, solid. He said it the way someone says solid when they actually mean not glamorous. I have a few investors from the construction world myself. Blue-collar guys who understand the value of real assets. I appreciate having that perspective at the table. Blue-collar guys, I had 43 employees at peak. I designed load-bearing frameworks for 3 hospitals and a federal courthouse. But okay. Lacey was looking at her wine glass. Dad, she said eventually, setting it down with a small deliberate click, we wanted to talk to you about something specific. She reached into her bag and slid a document across the table. Glossy cover, his firm's logo on the front. Colton is putting the final touches on a residential development near Lake Norman. 72 units. Pre-sales are strong. He just needs to close a funding gap before the end of the quarter. Colton leaned forward, and his voice shifted into something warmer, more consultative, like he'd rehearsed which gear to use. What we're offering qualified investors is a 22% return over 18 months, secured against the property itself. Your $200,000 would represent a senior position in the capital stack. Senior position in the capital stack. I have heard a lot of people talk about a lot of things over 63 years, and there are certain phrases that people use specifically because they sound like expertise and actually mean nothing at all. That was one of them. I didn't touch the prospectus. I'd like a few minutes with Lacey, I said. Just the two of us. Colton didn't move. He smiled instead, that same warm, practiced smile. Neil, anything you'd want to say, you can say in front of me. Lacey and I don't keep things from each other. I looked at my daughter. She was watching me with an expression I recognized, not from the last 3 years, but from before that. Careful. Waiting. Like she wasn't sure which version of me was going to speak next, and she was bracing either way. Lacey, I said, 5 minutes, please. She glanced at Colton. Something passed between them, the kind of wordless exchange that couples have in public when they've already rehearsed what they're doing. She shook her head slightly. Colton is going to be my husband, Dad. Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here. I sat with that for a moment. The restaurant moved around us. Silverware, low voices, a woman laughing at something at the table behind us. Completely ordinary and completely wrong for the moment. Then I reached under the table and brought up the folder. I set it in the center, between the wine glasses and the untouched prospectus. Everything I found is in there, I said. Quiet, even. The same voice I used when a project had a serious problem and I needed the crew to hear me without panicking. The FINRA complaints, the civil suit from his former partner, the SEC enforcement notice, the property liens on his name. The silence that followed was not the polite restaurant kind. I watched Colton's face do something I hadn't expected. Not shock, but a very fast, very controlled recalibration. Like a dial turning over. His eyes moved from the folder to me to Lacey, and for half a second, I saw something underneath the salesman composure that confirmed every page of what I'd spent 4 days looking at on a computer screen. Lacey was staring at the folder. She hadn't touched it. I came here tonight because you asked me to, and because you're my daughter, and I would walk through fire for that reason alone, I said. But I am not going to write a check that funds a fraud, and I am not going to sign anything. I looked at Colton directly. I think you already know exactly why. I moved the folder to her side of the table. That's yours. Read it when you're ready. Then I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and took out my wallet. I put down enough cash to cover whatever we might have ordered and left it next to my untouched water glass. Old habit. I don't leave without covering my share. Good night, I said. Lacey said something. I caught the beginning of it, but I was already moving toward the door. The October air outside was cold and sharp after the warm restaurant, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed it. Then I walked to my truck, got in, and sat there in the dark parking structure longer than I expected to. Not crying, not angry. Just sitting, with the particular heaviness of a man who tried to do the right thing in a room where nobody wanted to hear it. I drove home. I didn't sleep much. Sunday I raked every leaf in the yard, all of them. 2 solid hours of the most productive nothing I have ever done in my life. Monday morning, my old college roommate called, just checking in, and we talked for an hour about absolutely nothing important, and it was one of the better conversations I'd had in months. Monday night, I turned on the local news mostly for background noise while I ate dinner. The anchor came on with that particular shift in her voice, the one that tells you the next story is different from traffic and weather. She said that federal prosecutors had unsealed an indictment that afternoon against a Charlotte real estate developer. Charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The developer had allegedly raised over $2.3 million from private investors across 4 years, with no actual development projects ever breaking ground. The money had been used to fund the developer's personal expenses, including a leased penthouse apartment and a boat registered in his name out of South Carolina. They showed a photograph. I set my fork down. I watched the segment to the end, then I got up and turned off the television and stood there in the kitchen, in the quiet for a moment. I don't know how to describe what I felt in a way that is both accurate and honest. Not triumph, nothing close to it. Mostly I felt tired. The way you feel when you've been tense for 4 days straight and your body finally decides to let go all at once. And underneath that something else. Small, quiet, almost embarrassed to be there. A sense that I had done what a father is supposed to do. Not perfectly, not in time to prevent all of it, But I had tried to stand between my daughter and a disaster, and I had not flinched. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't really want. I sat down, and I waited because I already knew what was coming next. She knocked on my door 2 nights later, Wednesday, around 9 in the evening, hard and urgent, the knock of someone who'd been driving around working up the nerve. I opened the door. She was wearing the same dress she'd had on at the restaurant, or close to it, something that looked like it had been slept in, or cried in, or both. Her mascara was long gone, which meant she'd been crying long enough to run out of it. Her eyes were swollen in that specific way that only comes from crying so long your body starts producing something heavier than tears. "Dad," she said. The single word cracked in the middle of it. "Hey," I said. "He was arrested." She stopped, swallowed hard, at the engagement party, in front of everyone we know. They walked in and put him in handcuffs in front of 60 people, and She couldn't finish the sentence. I stepped out onto the porch, pulled the door mostly closed behind me. She looked at me like she didn't understand why I hadn't stepped aside to let her in, and that look told me she still didn't fully see it yet. "Lacey," I said, "I sat 3 feet from you at that restaurant, and I put 31 pages of evidence in front of you. I asked for 5 minutes. You told me he was more important than 5 minutes with your father." "I didn't know what he was doing," she said. "I swear to you, Dad, I had no idea." "I believe you," I said, and I meant it completely. "I believe you had no idea. That is exactly why I needed you to listen to me." She looked down at the porch boards. A breeze moved through and shifted her hair. "He lied about everything," she said, quieter now. Her voice had gone flat the way voices go when a person has been repeating something terrible to themselves so many times they've temporarily run out of feeling about it. "The apartment, the business. He was using investor money for himself. One woman lost her entire retirement fund, Dad, her whole life savings." She looked up. "What am I supposed to do now?" I thought about that question, the real full weight of it. "I'm going to pay for you to see a good therapist," I said, "and I will make sure you have groceries and a roof over your head while you get back on your feet, because I am your father, and that does not switch off no matter what." I paused. "But the wedding is gone. The life he was building for you on other people's money is gone. What comes next has to come from you." She started to say something. I could see her gathering either an argument or a plea. "You wanted to be treated like an adult," I said, gentle, because I meant it gently. "Adults live with the consequences of the choices they make. That's all this is. I'm not punishing you. I'm not keeping score. I'm just not going to be the thing that prevents you from learning what you need to learn." Her mouth closed, opened again. A few tears tracked down her face, and she didn't seem to notice them. "I'm sorry," she said finally. Just those 2 words, but they were the first ones like that in 3 years. "I know," I said. "I know you are." We stood there together under the porch light for a long moment. I could hear the neighbor's television through an open window somewhere down the street. Some kind of game show, audience laughing at something completely separate from all of this. "My door is open," I said. "When you're ready to walk through it as my daughter and not as someone who needs something from me, that's the only version of this I have left in me to offer. Take it or don't." She nodded barely. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and turned and walked to her car. I watched her taillights back out of the driveway. Then I went inside. I didn't feel good. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of watching your child's life come apart that feels like winning, not even when you saw it coming, not even when you warned them. I sat in the armchair in the living room for a long time in the quiet. But here is the thing I kept coming back to, sitting there in the dark with the house doing what the house does around me at night. I had not been withholding. Not once. Not that Tuesday when I read her text. Not Thursday when I sat at my computer pulling public records until midnight. Not Saturday at the restaurant when I placed 31 pages of the truth in the center of that table and walked away without raising my voice once. I had shown up completely. I had loved her the way I know how to love, by doing the hard, unglamorous, unappreciated work of actually paying attention. Whether she ever opens that folder and reads it all the way through, whether she calls me back in a month or a year or never, whether any of it eventually means something to her, none of that is mine to control. A few weeks after that, I did something I had been putting off for longer than I cared to admit. I booked a road trip to Acadia National Park up in Maine, 7 days. Just me in the truck and no particular schedule and a cooler in the back seat. I'd been saying I wanted to do that trip for 20 years and something always came up. Nothing came up this time. I left on a Wednesday morning in November with a full tank of gas and drove north. The park was mostly empty that time of year. Cold gray, the Atlantic doing what it does against those rocks, regardless of whether anyone is there to watch it. I walked out on the rocky coast on my second morning and stood there with the wind coming off the water, and I thought about all of it. Nadine, and the years I spent trying to be the father I didn't quite know how to be. And Lacey at 19 sitting across from me at Thanksgiving, laughing at something I said about traffic, and the dinner at the reserve, and the porch in the dark. And then I stopped thinking about it. Because the ocean was right there, and it has been there for longer than any of this matters, and it doesn't particularly care one way or another. I stood there for a while. Then I went and found breakfast. If any part of this story landed close to home, drop a comment below. I'd like to hear from you. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.